Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm now joined in the studio by Jonathan Mackenzie. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, how are you today?
Yeah, very good.
Fantastic. Also, auf Wiedersehen? No, what do I normally say? Guten Tag, Herr Stafford-Bloor. Wie geht's du?
Guten Tag, Herr Devine. Wie geht's gut? Wie geht's gut?
Love to hear that your gates are good. Seb, of course, back in Germany, and will be joining us for today's podcast to discuss the following. Sadio Mane to Bayern Munich has been completed. We'll talk about that. There was also some discussion of Raheem Sterling to Chelsea. As we speak, that is currently still a report. So, we'll discuss that. Other transfers. Fabio Vieira, we're going to talk about, who's joining Arsenal. Mario Götze, expected to join Eintracht Frankfurt. I think can guess who put that one in the plan, Seb Stafford-Bloor. Also, Mark Roca is moving to Leeds, apparently. So we'll ask John about that. Other things. We're going to talk about the Bundesliga tax. We're going to talk about Frankie de Jong. Crypto sponsors. Premier League 2. Juanma Leo leaving. At least one of these things we won't get to. But also the Pogmentary. I watched the Pogmentary. Or the Pogumentary?
Pogmentary.
Did you watch all of it?
No, I just watched 2 episodes of it.
Right, okay.
I need to check, actually.
It has
because I've been
episodes.
saying Pogmentary.
It is Pogmentary.
It should be Pogumentary.
Yeah, it definitely should be Pogumentary.
Why did they decide to go for... Because Pogumentary.
Yeah.
Why did they decide to go Pogmentary? These questions and more we will discuss later. And if you want to know why arbitrary decisions are made, you should visit The Athletic. Visit theathletic.com/Tifo, theathletic.com/Tifo for all the latest critical analysis of arbitrary issues, including football and other arbitrary issues. That's right, theathletic.com/Tifo. Well, I guess that's all for the intro. We should probably begin discussing one of those things now. Let's do that. I'll leave you in the warm hands and the cool embrace of Sadio Mane. Yeah, Sadio Mane to Bayern Munich has been completed, Seb. On the cheap? On the cheap, question mark?
No, I don't think so. Player coming towards the end of his prime, got a lot of wear on his tyres. I don't
What
think
was
so.
the transfer fee?
30 million euros. I think there's a few incentives in there and a few clauses and what have you. But I think Liverpool have done quite well out of it. I think also Bayern Munich have got a really good player for a very reasonable fee. I think everyone wins. We don't always have to have a winner and loser in transfer deals. Not always.
Well, that is what helps make it dramatic. There was it's in discussion of the Raheem Sterling to Chelsea rumour as well. We have a tweet in here from Grace Robertson on Twitter, who describes the reported Sterling fee of 35 million as not dissimilar to Mane. And Grace says the market for attacking players over 26 has quietly crashed. John, do you think that's true? I'm racking my brains to remember the last striker over 26 that moved for a lot of money.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because we're definitely in a point in time where the markets have to shift. I think Grace as well also tweeted after this about the fact that top 6 sides are now going to have to get used to selling to one another if they want money, because there's been that aggregation of finances all to the big English sides. And so if you want to make money, then you have to sell to where the money is. So I think the market's definitely changing. And I've been someone who has expected that change to be maybe more apparent than it has been. But I guess these things always take a little bit of time to sort of come out in the wash.
It's interesting, that idea, isn't it? Because you think about, the players never transferring between Man United and Liverpool, for example, or like big clubs with big club rivalries who don't want to strengthen opponents, but now have numerous players on their books that no other team in the world can afford. It's also, I feel like it's been a kind of, maybe it's wrong to say that this is a new thing, but it feels like a feature of the last 5 years, that when a certain type of player or a player of a certain ability comes on the market, they really have very limited options of where they can go. A list of all of the big clubs in Europe, those Super League clubs, for want of a better descriptor, and then of that group, whichever ones A, need a player in that position, and B, are spending money that summer, it tends to be 50% or less of them, right?
Yeah, and I think to talk about just moving between clubs, there's definitely been an impact of the financial markets, because take, for example, someone like Dan James, who moves from Manchester United to Leeds. I think 10 years ago that probably wouldn't have happened, but it happened and because of the rivalry. And very little was made of it. I mean, Calvin Phillips, another player who was touted to maybe go the other way, has been very much quashed because of that. But I definitely think that people now think of the market much more in terms of where is the available money rather than, you know, the more underlying rivalries that are going on too.
Yeah. Well, Seb, with Raheem Sterling specifically, the reports around this are that the fee would be about £35 million. He's 27 years old. He does only have 1 year left on his contract, so that can explain why it feels low. But at 27 years old for Raheem, 27 years old, Raheem Sterling, 35 million. It does feel like quite cheap, doesn't it?
It does, but then remember that Raheem Sterling has been playing top flight football since he was 17, so he's actually quite an old 27. He hasn't had many serious injuries. He's got a lot of games under his belt. The only reason I think it's probably a little bit cheap is because one of my half-baked theories was that the introduction of 5 substitutes in English football would mean that most clubs, especially most clubs inside the top 6, would try and hold on to players even with greater competition in their places. So if someone like Sterling, who's got a guaranteed output, you'd think, right, well, in a 5 substitute world in Premier League football over the course of 38 games, also when you're a team who have yet to conquer the Champions League mountain, it's kind of a strange decision. I know that Julian Alvarez is on his way, and obviously Erling Haaland has already arrived, but it's odd, and I wonder whether this is just a case of it might be led by the player. Raheem Sterling grew up in London, of course. He's from London. He's never played he's never played any of his senior professional career in London. It might just be one of those, and I mean, he's got as good a chance of winning the European Cup with Chelsea as he probably does in Manchester City, and also it's not going to harm his England career. So yeah, I get it. I mean, it's just, I don't know. I'm interested. I'm interested in these kind of transfers because if you remember, before the Super League kind of went supernova and before it became formalised, there were all those discussions about kind of Andrea Agnelli's vision of what it might become. And one of those sort of informal recommendations or ideas was that trading between clubs included within the Super League would be banned. Now, that was never part of the formal Super League proposal. That was just a kind of a bit of away from the table working on Agnelli's behalf. But it's interesting and kind of indicative of the mindset. Like, let's weaken the other teams around us, but let's never weaken or strengthen each other. That's kind of a pretty cynical mindset, but it's instructive.
A situation of balance of power. I quite like to imagine in that scenario that you'd have players leaving one Super League team to spend one season at a senior non-Super League team before going back to the Super League with a different team. I imagine that there would be various loopholes exploited. Good God. Thankfully, we're not in that situation. John, what do you think of Raheem Sterling? I feel like he's a player who is critically underrated by some, but then overrated by others.
Yeah, do you think there's something in the fact that he plays for Manchester City? Don't think anyone heard that. It's fine. I got away with it. The fact that he plays for Manchester City, and it's really because City is such a system team that you always get these players who go there and people say, they're just not as good as they were when they were elsewhere. I mean, Jack Grealish is a great example of that. Do we think the same is maybe true of Raheem Sterling as well? And any of those players when they're rotated all the time and they don't ever sort of get those long momentum runs and stuff, whether or not people just sort of undervalue them because they sort of don't feel as flashy maybe as they can be in other teams. Also,
it strikes me that at least in the last season or two, whenever Sterling has played, his remit has often been to hug the touchline. So he's not going to score as many goals from those positions as he would do if he was more central. I think one of the things that is often a criticism of him is that he doesn't score enough. But like you say, in a system team, as a system player, in a role that perhaps isn't necessarily supposed to be the main goal scorer, maybe he's a bit unfairly criticised for that.
Yeah, and he was good for England as well in the most recent tournament. So I think that sort of shows that in a different system he may be quite different.
Can you see him working at Chelsea, Seb? Again, we should emphasise we don't know whether this is going to happen or not. We're recording this on a Monday, and maybe it'll all have been poo-pooed by the time this is released.
Yeah, I think so. More or less because I still don't have a fixed idea of what Chelsea's forward line is. And if you were to add a player, it's just a concoction of abilities, isn't it? And Raheem Sterling is very much that kind of player. You can just chuck him in and you can give him a role. Left, I probably prefer him on the left, but you can play him on the left, play on the right, play him through the middle. He brings something different to each of those roles. And if you add him into a kind of a soup that involves Kai Havertz and Timo Werner and Mason Mount and Hakim Ziyech potentially, that's quite interesting. Just because it sort of adds that idea of fluidity, I suspect. But yeah, I get it. I feel a little bit as if this might be more of a new owner signing if it happens. You want a name, don't you? Because you're succeeding Roman Abramovich. It's a pretty difficult gig from a kind of a player recruitment standpoint and reputational standpoint with Chelsea fans. You want a name, and it's a pretty good first transfer if you can conclude it, to take a England international in theoretically the prime of his career away from the league champions. That's quite a nice move. It's quite a nice little bit of cachet to that, I think. But he works too. It's not a vanity signing if it happens.
But does he sit? I mean, John, does he sit in one of those inside forward roles? Because Chelsea obviously play three at the back. Kai Havertz is clearly the favoured player to start up front. It sounds also at the moment like Lukaku is nearing that loan move away to Inter, as many people expected. I mean, Chelsea still have quite a stacked forward line, even without him. Like, does he sit in one of those roles behind Havertz?
I think they do play him in that role, yeah. And I think Chelsea this season have probably had transition issues. So it feels as though they're brilliant at progressing the ball through the first 2/3 of the field. Maybe a little bit too plodding. And it sometimes feels as though they're then faced with a team that they then have to break down. And I wonder whether or not bringing someone like Sterling, who's going to be really good at carrying the ball and getting into that space behind, whether or not that's an attempt to start fixing some of those problems.
Well, do you like him alongside, so Kai Havertz as a starter, Mason Mount is the other, seemingly to me is the other starter. Do you like Sterling alongside those two players? He does have different qualities.
Yeah, you would expect Sterling to be someone who would move into those wider spaces. And you mentioned before, at Man City, he likes to pin opposition fullbacks wide, and that's just a Pep thing, right? Where you get your two wide players really wide, spread that back line as much as possible, and maybe Tuchel is thinking that might be a way to maybe have a little bit more joy at creating chances.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Seb, thumbs up, thumbs down.
I think so. I strangely, for a transfer which involves a very big name and probably quite large fee, I'm not that enthused by it one way or the other. I don't have strong feelings.
It's kind of weird, isn't it?
It is a little bit weird. It's a sort of I'm bored of this, I'm going to go and do this now kind of situation. So I find it hard to get fired up. I don't know. Ask me again in 6 weeks when we're close to the season. Maybe I'll be more interested.
It's a transfer bot transfer, isn't it? Something
it
that
is
pops
a little
up
bit
on Twitter when it's one of those funny accounts where they're like, I don't know, Matt Letizia to Brighton or something.
Sure. It also feels very Football Manager or like any kind of video game sim, the sort of thing that might happen that does in your game. I remember when I played the FIFA video game many years ago, and I'm elongating the front end of this anecdote because I can't remember the name of the player, so I'm hoping the name of the player will come to me as I continue to talk. I was playing as a football team in the Premier League, of course, the top division of English football, and there was Jeremy Toulalon. There we go. Do you remember Jeremy Toulalon?
Yes, I do. Yes.
I don't know why, but like this particular version of the game, I don't know, no idea what year it would have been. Many years in the past. Jeremy Toulalon, every time I started a new career mode with a different team, would be signed by one of the big Premier League teams. And I'd never heard of him. And he never came to England, did he? What became of Jeremy Toulalon, Seb?
So he was part of the Malaga revolution. Do you remember when Malaga suddenly became very, very wealthy and then just as quickly suddenly turned all the money taps off?
Sure, I remember that.
Was one of the guys who went over. Distinctive because he was, I think he went grey at about 25. So he was very noticeable. But he was a good player. And also he was caught up in that, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's quite grand enough to be referred to as a phenomenon, but French players that were good were always going to play for Arsenal eventually. Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
Yeah, because of Arsene Wenger. So Toulalon, don't know how he did at Malaga, but he went to Monaco afterwards, I think. Did reasonably well, I guess. I'm kind of ad-libbing. I don't really remember. I remember the face and I remember the player. I don't remember much of the context around him.
He does look very old.
He did, yes.
No, I mean, even now.
Well, he's probably about 40
Well,
now.
he's 38.
He has
only
aged.
38
One of those
years old.
incredible players who looked older the older they got.
Yeah.
I just think it's interesting to look at him at the peak. His market value in 2009, I guess it would have been around then, 2009, when I was playing this game, and he was at Marseille, was 22 million euros at 25 years old, which is quite a lot of money back then. Jeremy Toulalon. There we go. What a pointless discussion that was.
Kind of fun.
Fun to say his name as well.
Yeah.
Also, a great name. I think that's why one of the reasons despite the fact that I initially forgot it, it has stuck in my memory. Toulalon. Jeremy Toulalon.
It's got the French on.
It's got the French on, exactly, yeah. I do like the French on. Okay, fine. There's other transfers as well. Let's talk about one of them now. Sensible transfers favourite, Xaver Schlager. Sorry, I've said his name wrong. That's good. Xaver Schlager has joined RB Leipzig. Now, Seb, you've written this in here as sensible transfers favourite. Is it bad that I don't ever remember hearing his name before ever?
Well, it's not good. I mean, it's not bad, but it's not good. He appeared in he was one of our old friend Alex Stewart's recommendations for Real Madrid a couple of years ago. Right. Hasn't made it to Real Madrid, but has gone to RB Leipzig, and that's a good deal. So
yeah, you said that with glee. Then I felt like you were enjoying reveling in Alex's failure.
Not at all, because RB Leipzig are very smart recruiters. So if anything, it's an endorsement of Alex.
Just to be clear, you're not cussing out Alex on the podcast.
I am absolutely not doing that
because it sounded a bit like that's what you wanted to do. Start some kind of war, or
that's kind of what you wanted me to say, but I haven't. And so now you're trying to finesse it in a way that makes it seem as if and that's just not the case. Yeah. What I was going to say though is, so RB Leipzig, one of the question marks hanging over their summer is what happens to Konrad Laimer.
He's the central defensive midfielder.
Yeah, well, he's the best player they have in that position at the moment, but it's rumoured that he's leaving. Not quite sure to where yet, but and that's still not certain. But Xaver Schlager enjoyed like everybody at Wolfsburg, absolutely rotten 2021, 2022. It was an absolute disaster. Caught up with the Mark van Bommel situation and the sacking mid-season. New start and a good club for him. Okay. Perfect player in a perfect situation. I think he'll do very, very well. But then that's one of those transfers. The reason it's on here is because one of those transfers that happens, which has a kind of a domino effect. So it happens, and then you expect other things to happen as a result of it, with an effect spread across Europe. So we should.
Can I make a sort of a comical suggestion as what might happen as a result of that domino effect? Konrad Laimer. Do you think there's any chance he might go to Manchester United as something that the scouting team were working on 4 months ago under Rangnick? That kind of delayed thing. That'd be funny, wouldn't it?
I don't think you would fit in very well at Manchester.
No.
That's why it would be funny. That's why I'm saying, because it's a sort of, never mind. This joke hasn't.
You said kind of like funny with a dead, lifeless expression in your eyes. Yeah. I didn't believe that you would find that funny at all.
I think I knew then.
Xaver Schlager, though, an interesting guy, because if you look at his CV, he goes from FC Liefering, which is the bottom level Red Bull side. He then goes to Red Bull Salzburg, obviously the Red Bull side.
He's the own boy of the Red Bull network.
Yeah, so he's gone via Wolfsburg, but him turning up at Leipzig eventually is not that surprising.
No.
It's like a sort of Ross and Rachel moment in football.
Yeah, keep it in the company. Okay, there we go, fine. Other interesting things that have happened. Fabio Vieira to Arsenal, and this one's quite interesting, John, isn't it? Because he's a player with a very high ceiling.
Yeah, he's a sort of cut across midships everyone's understanding of how transfer windows work, right? Because no one had heard of him.
Sure.
It used to be the case that 20 years ago, something like this might happen where a player is just touted and then suddenly you're like, Cristiano Ronaldo, this Portuguese wonder kid, is going to Manchester United. No one really knows who he is.
And he'll just turn up on CFAX. That would be
exactly.
And
now that never happens because we all know everyone and we all know things are happening way in advance. And so, I did
Fabio Vieira.
Yeah, well, I did my due diligence on him this weekend. I always like to have a little bit of a watch of players to see what they're like. And you're right. He has a very high ceiling, and I think his high ceiling comes from the fact that he's a very creative player. And I think creativity is one of the hardest things to enact on a football pitch. So if you can get a player who's good at that, then you're onto a winner. But he's also quite an interesting player in terms of his profile beyond that, because the player who kept running through my mind when I was watching him was Mesut Ozil. So Fabio Vieira is a very floaty player. He likes to drift in between lines, pick the ball up and progress it. He's got a really wonderful through ball in him. Those through balls where they play the ball and you think it's a misplaced pass at first.
Sure.
And then lo and behold, it ends up at the feet of someone and you're like, how on earth did that happen?
Like the FIFA 14 triangle button pass.
Yeah, if that helps you to visualize it, then
does,
I'll take your word for it.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, but he's it came to my attention through smarter people than me telling me this, that Porto, the team that he's been signed from, at times sort of struggled a bit to fit him into their system. They do play a 4-4-2, so that is a bit different to what Arsenal do. But he's not, he's not just a plug and play person.
Yeah, he's not like an out-and-out striker, so you can't really play him as one of a two or as a lone striker. He's also not really a standard midfielder. He's not brilliant out of possession as a midfielder, and so you're sort of caught with this guy sort of betwixt and between things. I guess you'd probably call him a 10, but they played at 4-4-2 with the diamond a lot, and they used him as the 10 in the diamond, and they sort of push in out of possession moments. They sort of push him in between the two strikers to press, to sort of get him out the way a little bit, but it allows him then to be quite fluid, and you'll see him dropping right deep, picking the ball up and right deep.
Right. The thing with Arsenal though is that they play Odegaard in the 10 role, right? Saka seems to be kind of nailed on right side. I would have thought if they were going to bring in an attacking player this season, that it would have been someone who is an option on the left, because on the left hand side they have Martinelli and I guess Pepe can play there. But that feels like the weaker of the three positions behind the striker. It doesn't sound like Vieira plays there.
Yeah, and this is why it's such a confusing transfer, I suppose, because as you've said, Odegaard is that floaty player who can play deeper. He sort of starts out as an 8 and gets forward on that right hand side, interplays with Saka, and is playing those sorts of similar passes, right? Those through balls into the box that often look quite creative. And so the question is like, why spend however many millions for pushing 40? Was it? It was a lot of money.
I can't remember. Yeah,
for
around that
backup player, I say. But then this is the interesting thing about Fabio Vieira, is that he has this really high ceiling, as you say. But then when you've got someone like Odegaard who fits in to the system and can do, he has his position, he can drop in as an 8, he can help out defensively. It works. You're then bringing in a player who is maybe, like you say, has a higher ceiling than Odegaard. I'm not particularly good at talent ID, so I'll take the expert's word for it. But it feels as though you're losing something systematically that you're maybe gaining in terms of like a very specific outlet in terms of creativity.
It's weird. Except you think it's one of those... Yeah, no, go ahead.
Well, no, just because from what John was saying, and also from the conversation, from a conversation I had with someone who knows the game far better than I did, the way he was kind of described it was almost impact sub territory. And I think we're trained to think of impact sub as kind of a negative description of a player. But in reality, if you think about some of Arsenal's worst performances last season, where yes, they concede goals and they would struggle to create chances, but at a much more basic level, sometimes they really struggled to change the tone of their performance and the nature of it and the type of possession that they were playing with. If you introduce someone like him, who is pure creation, who sees the game clearly in a very different way. Like, I'd never really paid any attention to him at all until I heard the news that Arsenal was signing him. But even if you just watch him on highlight form, you can see the sort of I suppose that kind of between the raindrops quality that his passing seems to have. If you're able to introduce someone like that for 20, 30 minutes in a game, obviously start him in others, but 20, 30 minutes in a game, doesn't that become worth the investment, even if that's his sole value? Like especially, again, and I'm going to bang the drum for my half-baked theory, especially in 5 substitute world.
Yeah, I like half-baked theories, and my half-baked theory is that we're moving towards a period of specialization with players.
Exactly,
right?
that.
You've got 5 subs. You can bring in, players who you wouldn't want to play for the full 90, but you're chasing a game. Say the game state is in a particular way, and you need to try and achieve one thing. Then why not bring on a player who's really good at that one thing?
I like half-baked ice cream. The Ben and Jerry's flavour of ice cream.
Baked Alaska.
No, half-baked.
Is that what it's called?
Well, no, baked Alaska is a separate flavour. Half-baked is a combination of chocolate brownie and cookie dough together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Other brands of ice cream are available.
Yeah, they're definitely available. Yeah.
No. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. There's also Vitinha, Seb, who's another Porto player who's being rumoured at the moment with a move to PSG, I think. and I realise I'm not supposed to be asking you about him.
I could
supposed
not
to be
pick him
asking
out of
you.
a police line.
Supposed to be asking John about him. John, there's this other
Shall I take my
player.
glasses off and
Yeah,
pretend to be
there we
Seb?
go. That is one of my favourite comments so far about John's arrival here at the Tifo Football. The
Can you
Athletic.
ham up your accent as well while you answer, please?
Yeah, working class Seb with glasses. Vision
Yeah.
impaired working class Seb. I like it. I think it's nice. Yeah, okay. I don't know what I'm doing.
Vitinha
Vitinha-
question mark?
Oh,
Vitinha
yeah.
sort of fits nicely with the Erdegaard thing that we talked about before. So
Yeah.
you're getting
You keep calling him Erdegaard. Is that how you say his name?
that's how. I know you have really
No, I'm just curious.
strong beliefs on how to pronounce.
At this point in the episode, people will be saying, why does he keep interrupting people? I want to hear what someone's saying. The reason I interrupt, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just curious. When someone says a footballer's name I've been saying in a different way a lot, I'm always curious to interrupt everything that's happening to
Well, I
understand.
can assure you that I'm completely right on the pronunciation, but
Erdegaard.
I am doing it in a way
I
as
believe you.
as you like to
Yeah.
anglify the correct pronunciation.
Tell
That's
me
what I'm
again,
doing.
explain it to me. Erdegaard.
Erdegaard is how you
You
pronounce
don't
it.
have the D in there at
Martin
all.
Erdegaard, if
So-
you're actually like Norwegian. That's
So
how
I
you
would say Erdegaard, but that's wrong. Erdegaard.
Erdegaard. You sort of soften the D.
You soften the D.
There may be dialectical differences within Norway where people pronounce it differently.
Erdegaard.
The reason why I
pronunciation.
pronounce his name in that way is because when he arrived at Arsenal, he did an announcement video. And he said, "Hello, I'm Martin Odegaard.
But you can't
can
trust
call me
them.
Odegaard." So, but I decided to just
Erdegaard. It is with a kind of almost at the end.
Odegaard.
Oh, this is news to me, man. Okay, fine. Erdegaard. Fine. What were you saying?
I've completely forgotten.
Vitinha.
Yeah, I was just saying that he's almost like a cipher, right? It's the same thing, right? Odegaard has a much broader skill set.
Yeah.
Do you want me to stop saying his name? Or are you just gonna
I'm just hearing
you're gonna
it so
snort every time I say
loudly. Erdegaard.
Odegaard?
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
I've lost my train of thought again.
What
But
we were saying, we're saying up here that I'm correct in thinking that Porto also have Vitinha, right? So they have these two young players. Arsenal have now signed Fabio Vieira. Vitinha is reportedly of interest to PSG. I think there were reports connecting him to Manchester United as well. Anyway, litany of big teams, and he seems to be a player who arguably maybe his ceiling is slightly lower, but it fits into teams more easily.
yeah, much more well-rounded, right? Which is what we were talking about with that Norwegian player that I mentioned before.
Sure.
So yeah, and I guess that touches on what we were talking about in terms of specialism, right? Vitinha is a player who you will start in your team and will get everything out of him that you need to, and then maybe bring on Fabio Vieira later on if you want to get.
Do you think you'd be sad? I mean, obviously we're taking this theory to
Extreme level.
extreme levels, but do you think, Seb, you'd be sad if you were Fabio Vieira to be a player maybe 15 years, as we're describing him, 15 years after the relevancy of players like that? We saw what happened to Ozil, saw what happened to players like Wayne Rooney, any of those natural 10s that sort of faded out of the game as the tactics, at least in the Premier League, have changed. It's a bit of a strange species to be at this time in football, isn't it?
No, I think it's still a massive privilege to be considered that kind of player, because it's a status only afforded to the most gifted, to the most creative, kind of most decadent players. Also, I think that the way that football is going to be competed, or the kind of the type of competition you're going to see at the very highest level of the game, it's almost going to be kind of modular within games. Like you're going to, because of the amount of flexibility added substitutions should allow, and because of the kind of squad building practices they might afford or might inspire, you're going to see these kind of competitions within competition and games within games. And so if you're someone like that, you're charged with almost being, I can never remember his name. You remember the kid that used to come on and for the British hockey team and do something dramatic? Who remembers his name? He used to,
Hockey?
yeah, field hockey.
isn't
He
in
used
my
to come
contract.
on, and he was by far the most famous British hockey
Used
player.
to come on to hockey.
Yeah, so he was like a rolling sub and used to come on for like a short corner. I don't even really know what that is, but I remember the name of it. And he was really, really, really good at it. And as a result, he was the only person in the British hockey team that anyone knew, and you used to spend seconds on a pitch. Now, obviously, this isn't nearly like that, which brings into question why I've involved it in any way whatsoever. However, it's a status, isn't it? We win and lose off what you do. That's a real privilege.
Sam Ward.
No.
Liam Kirk.
No.
Laura Unsworth.
No, he had a very sort of public school name, like a Sebastian or a
British hockey player, public school
Sebastian
name.
Stafford-Bloor.
Yeah.
Sam Queck.
No, that's a very famous women's hockey player in Britain.
Alex Danson.
No. This is going to be bad audio content, but it was a long time ago. It was about 20 years ago now.
Tina Cullen.
He used to wear a big headband, and he was very famous. And Callum something, I forget his name.
Tina Cullen is 52 years old. MBE, a field hockey player from England. Yeah, player coach with She is a player coach with Bowden Heighton. You can be a player coach at 52 in hockey, in field.
I'm sure
hockey.
it can be the same in football if you go low enough.
I guess so.
I feel
Is
like I've
that low?
betrayed the podcast because like we spent our time fighting against Joe's desire to go off in tangents.
Bowden Hockey
and now
Club
I've
is a
given
field
him. There
hockey
we
club
go.
based in Bowden, Greater Manchester. It was established in 1886, but the Bowden Club, which hosts the team, there's something on my screen that made the M look like a different letter, was formed in 1856. The men's first 11 play in the Men's England Hockey League.
Joe,
And yes,
What's the protocol here?
did you watch the Paul Pogba documentary?
yes, but that's not next on the list. Seth.
But I'm involving it now so that we can not whatever the opposite of derail you is. Rerail you.
I did.
I'm
watch
re-railing
the
your hosting.
Pogmentary.
Okay.
But I'd like to tell you first that the Bowden Heighton ladies play in the Investec Women's
Investec.
Hockey League. Investec. Anyway, let's talk about
rail
other
replacement
things. Oh, it's time
service,
for a
right?
break. We're having a break now. We'll be back after this break. Oh, we have returned after the break. There's one or two more, just one more transfer to get out of the way. Mark Roca leaving Bayern for Leeds. That sounds like a exciting thing, John.
Yeah, it's another one of Victor Orta's reclamation projects.
Oh.
He has a number of these where he takes players who've maybe not had the career trajectory that they were anticipating, and he tries to turn them around. And
Has he
bring them
done
back
that
as well.
successfully with other players?
Well, have you heard of Junior Firpo?
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't
Oh.
get reclaimed. But there's a lot of Leeds fans who think maybe this is the season when it will turn around.
This leads me to an exciting question for both of you. If you were able to take charge over a reclamation project, any team, any player, who do you think is out there who could do with a reclamation that you believe could have a successful career revival and beat away the current perceptions and expectation of their ability? Seb, I'm going to start with you.
Dele Alli.
Dele Alli. Yeah. Okay, no, that seems reasonable. And what team would you try to revive his career at?
Anywhere that Maurizio Pochettino was coaching, I think.
Right.
Not because their relationship was always the most productive, but because he was the manager who got the most out of him at that level. And there is a player there, but that player has been badly lost along the way, I think.
Okay, I like that. John?
I would say Mark Roca, and I would bring him to Leeds. I think that would be my reclamation project.
We made a video about the Bundesliga tax the other day. Does that relate here?
Do you want me to talk to you about who Mark Roca is? Roca, I should say. Roca?
Well, I do, because I remember Bayern
Does it seem
Munich
like we
making...
should?
Well, we should, because Bayern Munich made such a fuss about signing him, and then his time there was really a non-event. So I want to know kind of what happens next, really.
So he's a young Spanish midfielder. I say Spanish, I think he's Catalonian now. I don't know. Yeah, he's played for them internationally.
Oh.
But yeah, he was playing for Espanyol, was a sort of deep line playmaker, and everyone was talking about him a couple of seasons ago. Bayern bought him, and he's made 24 appearances, I think, in 2 seasons. So it hasn't gone well. And to the extent at which when Bayern had a problem with deep lying midfielders in terms of injuries, he couldn't even get on the team in those situations they were playing. I think they were playing Jamal Musiala, who's not a deep lying playmaker, ahead of him. So didn't seem to work, the move to the Bundesliga. And yeah, I suppose the question is, if a player moves from La Liga to the Bundesliga and it doesn't work out, what does that say about his potential for succeeding in the Premier League? And I guess the question a lot of people have asked is about physicality. So people claiming that, and it's an interesting question, right? Because a lot of people talk about the Premier League being physical and what that means, and some players just not being up to being Premier League players because of the physicality. I actually got a tweet here from Kees van Hemmen on Twitter, a smart guy on Twitter. He says, the manner in which the Premier League is physical is not the manner in which people think of when they say physical. And he said the best teams do not have the largest, strongest midfielders. Overwhelmingly, league challenging sides in the last decade have had midfielders composed of intelligent, technical players. It's physically demanding in that it's exhausting from an endurance and recovery standpoint. So I thought this might be an interesting,
rather than brawn.
What is it about a midfielder's physicality that makes him able to fit in? And having watched a bit of Marc Roca, he is maybe on the slower end of the spectrum. He's not the most snappy mover. I think explosive. Yeah. His acceleration isn't necessarily the best. And he maybe doesn't have the best straight line speed, I would say.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess that's the question, right? What sort of physicality do you need to play in the Premier League? What sort of physicality do you need to play in Jesse Marsch's team, and how will he suit that?
That is true. I mean, can you answer that question though? Because you've set it out for yourself, and it is quite interesting.
I'm not entirely sure, but I think that so Jesse Marsch has played with a double pivot so far at Leeds United, and it's interesting because I think as a double pivot, it's not what a lot of people think of when they think of a double pivot. So it's not that you're going to try and get two really defensive players in there and sort of clog up the central spaces. A lot of the role of the double pivot for the Jesse Marsch team is being able to play penetrative passes, get the ball forward. So Jesse Marsch is someone who uses counter pressing. So it's not about retaining possession so much as getting the ball into those advanced areas where you can then either directly attack the goal, or if the ball is turned over, you sort of fall on the ball and counter press, and then sort of generate chaos and try and attack in that sort of counter attacking moment. So Roca will be good from that point of view because he's very, very good at playing those progressive passes. I guess the question is, like, what do we think he will be like when he has to do the defensive side of the game, which I think is maybe a little bit more up for a question. But there is always the possibility that you can play a more defensive player alongside him, and that might ameliorate some of the problems.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting stuff. Fine. Frankie. Excuse me. Frankie de Jong, still rumbling on there, Seb. There have been a few things written about this over the week. It's quite an interesting situation, I suppose, specifically as it relates to Barcelona and their apparent need or not need, depending on who you believe, to sell players or not sell players. Again, depending on, I think, which team you support. What is that situation, please?
So obviously this was a topic last year too. This is the La Liga cost controls returning to the news cycle, and the cutoff point for the process of evaluation and calculation to begin is the 30th of June, and Barcelona still very much have troubling financial issues, big wage bill, not a lot of money to spend next season, and so Man United, who very much want to sign Frankie de Jong, find themselves in a kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because on the one hand, they had a dreadful season, and so fans quite understandably want to see a small army of new, better players march through the door, particularly given how many players have left on free contract, on free transfers. And yet, the longer they leave it, the better their negotiating position would seem to become. So a delay is kind of, it's what they should be doing, really, because the thing that Man United have been accused of most often in the past is overpaying, paying what they've been told by clubs they're buying from. I suppose the Harry Maguire situation is probably the best example of that.
They've also been accused of taking too long. So it feels like the worst possible situation for them to be in that taking too long is the right thing to do, but also overpaying is,
It feels like, on the one hand, a deserved legacy of underperformance over the past decade, but also, unfortunately, in this situation, just completely unavoidable because they can't do anything without being criticised for it. Because also, they've got a new manager in there who, as the cliche goes, when you're when you come into your first pre-season at a club, you want presumably a settled squad. You want to know what your components are, what your tools are to work with as early as possible, preferably before you go off on tour. Not sure where Man United are going this season, but I'm sure they're off somewhere. And at the moment, Erik ten Hag is seeing players leave and nobody coming in, which is less than ideal. So
I also thought, when the player we've already talked about, Vieira signed for Arsenal, it's kind of clear, I think, that Arsenal's main search at the moment is for a striker, someone to come in and replace Lacazette, and yet out of the blue, they've signed this other attacking player as well, showcasing what I think most football clubs' ability is of focusing on different players at the same time, pushing through different deals at the same time. I don't want to unfairly criticise Manchester United because I don't know the ins and outs of it, but they do always have the feel of a team that really can only focus on one transfer at a time. And I think one of the things that I've seen supporters worry about publicly is that if the Frenkie de Jong transfer does need to take a long time for it to make sense, are they going to not focus on other positions that might be needed as well?
So with that in mind, I was reading an article on The Athletic this morning, which it was about the exchange Richard Arnold, new chief executive, had with a group of fans over the weekend. But included between two of the paragraphs even, was a chart which showed how many members of United's technical structure have left over the past couple of years. And the kind of, I know replacements have been brought in, but with that sort of one thing at once criticism in mind, you do wonder whether there's a little bit of an expertise vacuum somewhere that prevents the sort of the club from performing as it should. And Arsenal, if you remember before sort of during that period of great change, before the new signings came in last year, there was all that executive reshuffling and several rounds of it actually. And so joining dots without really properly understanding the situation from my perspective, you could see, right, well, that's a club that's now reaping the benefits of having a joined up, a properly aligned technical coaching structure. Whereas Manchester United still feels a little bit chaotic. It still feels like they're in that mindset where they're just one player away or one appointment away and this saviour here is going to come in and everything's going to be better. Whereas actually, typically success seems to be the legacy of a lot of years of correct thinking or proper judgment, all those kind of things. So I don't know. But then look, in United's defence, concluding a deal for someone like Frenkie de Jong for, I don't know, 70 to 80 million euros with a club like Barcelona who are very political, also with a very nebulous sort of financial situation, that isn't easy, is it? And it very, very rarely is. So it's tricky. And also, it seems as if the interest in de Jong didn't exist before the end of the season, didn't exist before Ten Hag's appointment. I certainly hadn't heard of his name in connection with United in any credible way before Ten Hag arrived. So this seems to be in an era where a lot of these big deals are done 6 months, 18 months, a year in advance. This seems to be being put together very, very quickly. So that's tricky.
No, that's a good point. And also, one of the things I got from watching Pogmentary was, just some of the, you get a bit of a better insight into the day-to-day and how things that you might not consider when you're talking about footballers do have a big impact. You mentioned there a turnover of staff, people in the back room, Manchester United leaving, being replaced. It doesn't really matter how talented those new people are. Anybody listening to this who has a job knows what kind of turbulence or impact can be can occur when one of their colleagues leaves and is replaced. And we've had some of that here recently. We've got producer Jamie is new to the team today, and it's been an absolute nightmare. He's awful. JJ's gone on holiday as soon as hiring him, which just seems like two fingers up to me and John, leaving him to clean up his dirty work. He's insisting on being called Mr. Jamie, which I won't do, by the way. And I'm in charge here. He really needs to buck his ideas up, and I'm sure he will get used to what it's like working at a top-level professional team, really professional stuff. But I think it does those sorts of minor things perhaps aren't considered. You sort of think when it comes to a football club, you take away one sporting director and replace them with another, and on day one they should have the answer to absolutely everything. It just doesn't work like that. People are People are human beings. Anyway, very interesting stuff. Do you want to talk about this crypto sponsors thing? Oh no, I'll tell you what we should do. Let's talk about the Richard Arnold thing. You mentioned it there, Seb, didn't you?
Yeah.
John,
yeah.
what happened with Richard Arnold over the weekend? I saw some Twitter videos.
Yeah, so Richard Arnold is the new Ed Woodward.
Mm-hmm. By which you mean the sort of vice chairman, executive Manchester United person. Yeah.
The guy who's in charge, who everyone blames.
Yeah.
And a group of fans belonging to I think they call the 1958 club or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Sounds like a wine club to me, but
I thought they weren't connected to that team, were they?
No, they're not connected to the Man United Supporters Trust. They're a different group. Yeah,
I see.
The People's Republic of Mancunia rather than the Mancunian People's Republic.
Sure,
whatever.
sure.
Yeah. Let's not get into the ins and outs of Manchester United supporters clubs, but they essentially were going to go round to his house and protest outside. Apparently, he lives in a leafy Cheshire village, which I found funny. Like having recently lived in Cheshire, every village in Cheshire I can confirm is leafy.
You do have leaves in all the villages.
All of the villages have leaves, so that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, these guys were going to go and pitch up outside his front door with, I don't know.
Try to be seen through the foliage.
And he thought, I don't want people coming around my house and standing outside my door, so I'll head them off at the pub where they're gathering their forces.
It was the landlord of the pub called him to tell him, right, that there were these people gathering. I have to say, I forget about the ins and outs of the situation. Anyone going down to a pub to confront people who are about to come to their house, many men who are about to come and stand outside their house and protest them angrily or however angrily they were going to be, that's quite brave things to do. I'm not sure I would do that.
Yeah, I don't think I would do that either.
Did he go on his own?
Seemingly.
I think so.
Yeah. There's no suggestion that he went with any security or anything like that.
It's quite a brave thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Also, he then spent an hour talking to them or so.
Yeah, and there's various clips of videos that were taken, which I guess he'd asked them not to do, but then obviously inevitably it happened, and it's lots of interesting things coming out. I think that on the one hand, like the optics of it look good, because you kind of, as you said, it's someone at the club taking the fans seriously and trying to explain the club to them. On the other hand, you're never going to come across well, I don't think, in that sort of situation. So if you actually read the quotes, a lot of them don't make a huge amount of sense, and you're sort of reading between the lines. And when they're written, whenever anything that you say spoken is written down, it looks weird. So
particularly over an hour in a pub.
Yeah.
But it was perceived that he sort of put the boot in a little bit on Ed Woodward, and there was comments made about how Manchester United have spent a lot of money. I think there's a football, is it CIS football laboratory, whatever it's called, observatory,
observatory
report, which went out suggesting that Manchester United are the club who spent the most on players and recouped the least. So his argument was, well, we've spent a lot of money. What more do you want us to do? It's not necessarily the issue of spending money here. It's about specialism, and made a few comments about how it's my job to do various things, but not by the players as well. So get away from my house, basically.
Please don't come to my house. The thing I find interesting about it is the response to, you mentioned it there, like the idea that he's supposedly kind of stitched up or put the boot into Woodward a bit. You would, wouldn't you? I mean, I like the response to it being, it makes me think of it's like a kind of, like a playground argument has taken place. Somebody said something and then everyone listening has gone, ooh, of course you would. But he made several mistakes which made things really difficult and like have a kind of a legacy or continuing effect after he's gone. I appreciate that those two people are friends or friendly or whatever. But if you're having to have an honest conversation about the reasons why some things are difficult or more difficult than they should be at Manchester United, the idea that you wouldn't tell what I imagine, I believe to be the truth, which is that yes, some of Ed Woodward's actions have made things more difficult now than they might otherwise have been. Why wouldn't you say that?
You also
when
can't
you leave,
win,
I'm
Joe.
going to stick the boot in. I'm going to be like that Joe Devine. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah.
Terrible management. Does that ring a bell?
That does ring a bell.
Yeah.
So
that's the quote.
What are you going to say? You
everybody's-
can't win.
Well, he can't win though, because one of the main charges against Ed Woodward was that he was a company man, that he was a sort of a patsy for the Glazer family. So either Richard Arnold, and I don't know enough about Richard Arnold to assess whether he's going to be a good or bad chief executive, but if he defends Ed Woodward, he's accused of being just another Ed Woodward.
Yeah.
Now, if he criticises him, and the quote that's drawn attention is the fans are talking about, the transcription says that the fans were talking about recruitment, and Richard Arnold is saying, what we do is I just hand the money to John Murta and Eric Ten Hag, and they get on with it. Because, you don't want me picking players, do you? Which is, and I'm paraphrasing, but obviously that's about Ed Woodward. So either he defends Ed Woodward or he criticizes him, and in either case, it becomes newsworthy and it becomes a pin. It becomes a quote that's pinned on it. So I got a little bit of sympathy. Also, it's a shame that it was filmed because it just ensures that it won't happen again.
Yeah.
Because, and I get the temptation. If I was in that situation, I can't promise I wouldn't do the same. But if you have an agreement not to film something, and then someone does it, it just means that the person, in the risk-averse world that football's become, he's not going to do that again. And so you kind of break that line of communication, and that's a shame, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's an hypocrisy because we're now talking about it and we're loving all the quotes. So I completely accept that.
That is true. Something I also feel a little bit uncomfortable about how the tone of our conversation feels like we are defending him and saying what a great guy he is and was. I don't know him.
I have no idea whether he's a good guy or not. No idea.
Man United seem, like a club that do some things wrong and are therefore easy to criticise. I suppose I'm trying, sort of tossing around the idea in my head of is there a sort of situation? What is the situation in which it's okay to protest outside someone's house? Like, where's the line? What do they have to have done? I feel like if it's a politician, you can protest outside their house. I think that's probably okay. If it's an executive of a football club, particularly a new executive of a football club, who may or may not be responsible for things that have come before, what do they have to have done for it to be sort of not okay? Because I appreciate, like, it's fine, you can go and do that if you want to, but for it to be sort of justified. Because him going down to the pub to head them off is presumably partly because he thinks it's better than photographers coming to take pictures of them outside his house.
Yeah, it's hard to know, really, isn't it? It's the lines of causality that I think start to blur. Because, like you say, like, what do they expect him to do? They're anti the Glazers, so are they expecting him to sort of come out and talk to the Glazers and say, there's a bunch of lads outside my house who don't like you owning my club? And the point that he made actually in the conversation was that the Glazers just aren't scared of anyone because there's nothing that anyone can really do to actually change things for them, even though he did, I suppose, talk about the impact it was having on sponsorship and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of the point. The point is that the Glazers make a lot of money and they will continue to make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And as long as that's happening, unfortunately for Manchester United fans, and yeah, even as a Leeds fan, I feel for fans who have to deal with club ownership, which forgets the fact that clubs are football clubs, right? They are group. That's what club means. It was a group of members who all had a shared interest. And I feel as though what's happened, and we've talked about this, I guess, a lot in this podcast, it's just what's happened is that football has gone from being a convivial, communal experience with no sort of underlying ulterior motives to now being run by people who run the clubs as businesses. And whilst that gives us lots of good things, which is we get to see really elite players playing for certain teams and we get to see football at its finest in that sense, in terms of the actual talent that you can get, you also lose a lot as well. And so I always do feel for fans of clubs where they have lost that element a little bit. But at the same time, it does feel a little bit like Manchester United fans hate the owners because they're not winning, rather than because they want these convivial experiences of community.
I don't know. I mean, I think one of the things that you said there really hit Simon, is that the Glazers aren't afraid of anybody, and that must be incredibly frustrating. Not because you can't make someone afraid of you. I just mean that because you can't impact the way that someone runs something that you love or that you have a great deal of affection for. That must be a very impotent feeling. And
without metaphorically burning your own house down.
Yeah, and I've got a great deal of sympathy, and that cuts across any kind of tribalism or any rivalry. I just think it's very, very sad if you've got something which has been taken over and the associations with it have been changed, and you are powerless to fight back in any meaningful way. I do think there's a line. Like one of the things about the Richard Arnold situation was, I read this morning that one of the justifications for going down to the pub was because he had his wife and child, or children, plural, at home, and so he didn't want that outside, which is very human and natural and normal. I get that. But it's a very difficult situation. It's also very typical of what football's become, that you have this kind of ill-defined protest and, well, we don't know what we're really going to do, but we're going to do something, even if it doesn't really have a proper shape to it. And
that's why it's interesting. Like
the times.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's what, you said before, like, it's not clear what they want. I would say that's true, but also, firstly, I don't think protest necessarily needs to, require something direct to come from it. And also, the other thing to say is that, you have to feel angry about something to go and protest it. You and I didn't go out this weekend to protest golf for no reason, because that makes it sound like we did go out with a reason.
It did sound like that a little bit.
The point I'm making is that, these people are clearly upset about it because they've literally gone to a place to do a thing. I don't leave my house for almost anything, unless I'm going to die because I haven't got enough food to eat, or, toilet paper. Toilet paper is a big one, isn't it? Leave the house with toilet paper. Start buying more at the same time, and then you can reduce the number of times you have to leave the house. But the fact that they've gone at all, it suggests that they feel very, very strongly about it. And I think that is,
Well, also,
along the lines of what you've both been saying.
That thing about, like, Man United fans get a tough press because, obviously, like, the typical response is, well, you're not winning the Premier League anymore, or every season, so therefore, cry me a river kind of thing. But then all fandom is relative, like, in the sense that, okay, so if my club stops competing for the top 4/6 places, I have a sulk in, whilst they're playing mid-table football. That's relevant too. You can't just dismiss everybody's grievance because, your own side might be in League 2 or League 1 or a non-league.
Sure.
I get the kind of that there is a hierarchy of, seriousness in football situations. Of course,
can I add to that as well, just by saying like that I really agree with what you've said. That is a form of, you're the guy who's all about policing people's emotions as it relates to football, but it's a form of people trying to rationalize somebody else's emotion. And if, like, the only natural endpoint of that is to not watch football because it's a stupid thing, right? It's the same as, like, saying, well, don't be unhappy that your team hasn't done as well as they would normally do, because, you could be Stoke. It could be much worse. You could be Colwyn Bay FC. But that's okay. You're rationalising my emotional response to it. Like, if I rationalise my emotional response to football generally, I can rationalise it all the way down to no emotional response to the stupid thing that is happening in front of me. Why should I care at all?
But if you get used to something, make it a standard of living argument. If you get used to living in a certain way, or you get used to doing a certain thing, and that thing you enjoy.
You enjoy the dog. The dog died. Why are you upset? You were fine before you had a dog.
Well, I wasn't going to use that example, but in a way, like, it's if anything changes and it doesn't change for the better, you're going to have an emotional response to it. No matter. You can still appreciate that other people have it worse, or you can still appreciate that this team who, are only drawing 4,000 fans every weekend, that is a more serious situation in the kind of the neutral, dispassionate sense. Absolutely. But if something changes that matters to you, you're going to have a reaction to it. It's very normal.
This is the Spursiest argument I've ever heard. You're just... when you were in the wilderness of finishing in 6th place, you were sad about not getting the Champions League. Well, Leeds fans were there for 16 seasons out of the Premier League, and you still had it bad, I guess.
Look
but
at you go.
Is it worth talking about 50+1? Because I feel like we talked before about fans just feeling disenfranchised and disempowered, and I suppose with 50+1 in Germany, there's questions about, like, how impactful you can actually be, but you do still have that sense that the club is yours. And I think that's what's been lost in British football, for sure. This idea that, I have some kind of stake in this club, rather than football now in the UK feels like going to the opera. You see something happening and it's there, and you're sort of sat in the gods up at the top, and something happens down there. Whereas my experience of watching football in Germany is it's very different. Like, you do feel part of the team. Whenever I've been to see Freiburg play, after the game, the players mingle with the ultras, and they have sort of ritual stuff that they do together, and the players walk back through back to their cars through the crowd as well. And I know Freiburg is probably an outlier case, but you still get that sense of, the club belongs to us, it is ours, and we do have a say in how it's run.
I feel like 50+1 is a little bit of a fail-safe. Like you have these, for want of a better word, you have that identity at each club, for better or worse, whatever it may be. And 50+1 prevents it from being distorted or changed or taken away from you. I would stop short of ever describing 50+1 as a paradise, because I think it's very, very easy to make arguments on both sides of it, for and against. And those are all really well-known arguments. But at the same time, if what matters to you in football is this idea of a club in your own image, or a club that's built around your own personality, or one that your personality gravitates towards even, then 50+1 is your answer, because it stops somebody coming in, taking the kind of the value in your club and contorting it in a way that suits them, or it benefits their agenda or their interests. And I think that's a very, very valuable thing. But it's a complex argument. And also in Germany, of course, as John knows, you have some fairly silly exemptions to it. And it's a complicated situation because of the relationship between big corporations. I don't mean Red Bull in this. I mean sort of Volkswagen, for instance, and Wolfsburg, or the Bayer pharmaceutical company, Leverkusen. It's difficult, but yeah, it's.
It also reminds me of proportional representation in a sense, because it's in a similar sort of situation as it relates to England. The two major political parties are never going to vote for proportional representation because it takes away the reason that they can guarantee at least one of them has power. And I think the idea that the Premier League could move towards a 50+1 model it would only ever happen through some external force. We've seen the Tracy Crouch report come back after, I guess initiated after the Super League. And I think there's some reference towards fan ownership models such as that, but it's certainly not going to be something which is implemented. It's certainly also not something that wealthy Premier League owners are going to initiate themselves.
I think it's a mindset thing, right? I think that's what I take away from the difference between German football and UK football from what I've seen. And that is that in Germany, there is this sense that, what matters isn't necessarily winning everything. Obviously, that depends on which club you support. But in the UK now, I think it's just got to the point where people don't care what a club does as long as they're spending money, making their team better, making the squads better, and you're competing at some level. And that, again, that's fine. But I do think that has that whole shift of a mindset from being like, this is the club that I support because it's the town where I grew up and the people who I know support it, etc., has been eroded away. And we've got to this point now where it very much is like supporting the stock market in a lot of respects. Whereas in Germany, you still have that sense of actually there are things that are more important than winning. And I just think that mindset simply comes from the systems of governance that different clubs adopt.
What would you support on the stock market, though? I think I'd support beans.
Beans?
Yeah.
Half-baked beans?
Maybe. They are quite good. What about you, Seb? Wood chip or something?
Frozen orange juice.
Frozen orange juice, yeah. If we had a second break,
I think we should have one.
Let's have one, but then we haven't got time to talk about all those other things that we
don't
might
have
miss.
to talk about all of them.
But we will talk about the Pogmentary.
Yeah.
If only just to clarify. Let's have a break. Okay, we've had a break now, and we're back to clarify Pogumentary. What could the possible branding-related reasons be for going straight for Pogmentary and not for Pogumentary?
Who made this series?
Wasn't it Pog? Was it Paul Pogba? Let's have a look at Pogmentary.
If it's a non-English language company, then maybe they just...
So it's got 2.1 out of 10 on IMDb for a start. A glimpse into the life of Paul Pogba, the influential world-class French footballer.
It certainly does what it says on the tin, eh?
It does do that. It stars Paul Pogba
as himself
and others. Yeah. Let me find the details about this. Here we go. I don't want the cast. I would like the crew. Why doesn't it easily tell you who the production company were? It's quite annoying, isn't it? Anyway, never mind.
Did they call it that? Is that what the title is?
The title is The Pogmentary, and I'm saying Pogmentary. But surely it would be The Pogumentary.
I mean, I'm with you. I tweeted
What's
this.
happened?
Not
Did you tweet
2
this?
days ago. Yeah,
Really? This is
I said,
this is an
surely it's
established idea.
Pogumentary.
I'm not as original as I thought.
It's
That's
okay.
a real
It's
shame.
okay.
It
I've got
must
the
be.
receipts though. So
I would love to know, because it's so obvious that at some point, at the very least, 2 people will have had a conversation about this. And maybe the conversation will have even, it's the title of the film, maybe it will have included Paul Pogba himself. It may well have done, as a final check. Or
I think he's disappointed that he was sitting there when it came out and was like,
I went
should
for
have gone for
Pogumentary.
Pogumentary.
But somebody would have had a conversation. We said, oh, should we just lose the U? And someone said, why? And the other person said, well, it just sounds better, doesn't it? And they're like, yeah, but
You're replacing a word with 2 syllables with word with 1 syllable. You're not onto a winner, are you?
No, I agree.
Do you know what the bigger conversation is here? Is that at some
there one?
point somebody decided to discard the actual name of the very, 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 very famous football player and use something which just makes it more vague.
No, that's true though, and that is
because it's
a tribute to the brand, the strength of the brand, that you can put Pog before something and people know it is Paul Pogba.
See, I think that's where the misjudgment occurs. Like, I don't think it is.
Were you at any point confused who this film was about?
No,
Is
but
that what
had I arrived on Netflix,
Did you think it was about Pogs?
You thought it was about the childhood phenomenon that we experienced as youngsters. Yeah,
I didn't. But if I'd come to it fresh on Amazon, and by the way, when I lighted on the topic and it said this is not available in your country, the relief that the decision not to watch it had been taken out of my hands was absolutely amazing.
Flicking through German Amazon,
and then it just says no, you cannot watch it. I just thought that it might.
What could this be? Is this a German documentary about Pogs?
It's not that. It's not that. It's just that. How do you come to it fresh?
Confused.
I would have been less confused had it just been Paul Pogba, my journey, the decision, my Man United hell, whatever. There's a really bold...
Seb used to be in sports marketing. You wouldn't guess it, would you? Based on just the things he says. You'd think, my journey, the decision. This is why you're not allowed to title YouTube videos.
It is actually. It's one of the reasons, yeah. That's definitely true.
Well, anyway, aside from the fact that it should obviously be called the Pogumentary.
Maybe it's offensive in some language.
Pogument.
But then you could have just gone with Pogmentary, because it's still Pogmentary still like at least has it still has like, and it's got his whole name in it.
And it solves the problem Seb had. If Seb had seen Pogmentary, he wouldn't have been confused about who the film was.
He'd be like, who's
about.
Pogba-men?
Yeah, he was Pogba-men. Anyway, it's not great, no. But
how much did you watch?
2 episodes. I watched 2 episodes, totaling 60 minutes. Of the 60 minutes, I'd say about like 20 of them are not like an advert. The rest is sort of like adverts for Paul Pogba, just kind of chained. And lots of there's a lot of animation in it. They've kind of animated it. Well, I imagine a lot more than his childhood, but I've sort of mainly gone through the bits where he's talking about when he's younger.
They've animated it. They haven't got him dressing up as a school kid. That would be cool.
That would have been funny. A live action recreation.
Construction.
No,
what was the moment in episode 1 which you thought, that's good, I need to watch episode 2 now? There must have been a moment.
This is the thing, like 2.1 out of 10.
Yeah,
is
that sounds harsh.
This is the IMDb rating, and that will be people's. That's how IMDb works.
That's Manchester United fans. That is exactly what that is.
That's individuals' ratings, but that is suggestive of 2 things: one, that they're upset Man United fans, and 2, that they haven't put the work in to enjoy it. Some things aren't passive, right?
You're saying it's their fault for not enjoying it.
I am. I do think this with many things of the visual media, right? I believe. Some films, like a film with Danny McBride in, is passive, and you let it wash over you. It's got Will Ferrell in it, and he's going to make funny faces and noises. Don't get me wrong, this is not criticism. I enjoy those films greatly, and I watch them, and they wash over me like a warm sea on a nice sunny day. Warm sea, wash, wash, wash. All I've got to do, lie on the beach. That's it. Yeah. Some things. Some art you've got to put more work into. And the Pogmentary, like other forms of art, you have to put the work in to get something out of it. Obviously, an ordinary person might watch this and think, well, that's just a big advert for Paul Pogba. True. That is true. It is just an advert. But a very special person like me might watch that and just see, just little glimpses here and there, a little bit of body language. I watch them when they're sat around the dinner table with their friends in the not at all staged scene of when Paul Pogba comes home from a football match and his wife is there with her friends, that he sits with them around the table and talks about stuff in a not at all staged scene, or the not at all staged scene where Antoine Griezmann calls on FaceTime and Paul Pogba answers the call at the dinner table. And then there's sort of 3 different conversations going on at once, not at all staged. But there's these little moments, you know.
You're suggesting that he doesn't eat dinner.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He doesn't
use FaceTime.
No dinner. Now, what I'm saying is that even though these are created truths, within them there are deeper truths. You know, you can see the little bits of body language, the way that he interacts with somebody, the way. So, for example, Raffaella Pimenta, who is the lawyer that's being talked about a lot at the moment. She's I think in Italian press they've decided to call her the heiress to Mino Raiola's empire. She's worked with Mino Raiola for 20 years. She features in this documentary. I'd never seen her video before, but she is interviewed in it. There's scenes of her arriving at Paul Pogba's house. They embrace like a family. He describes her as an aunt. Like there's some, again, like she's there to say Paul Pogba's great and here's his side of the story, whatever. But like beyond the obvious stuff, beyond what they are telling you, the things that they don't think they're telling you, but they can't remove from the documentary without taking all humans out of it, are really interesting. Like they have seemingly a genuine kind of familial relationship. There's a scene where Paul Pogba is on FaceTime with Mino Raiola. The way that they talk to each other is quite touching. It seems like a genuine, authentic relationship. And I think, like I was saying to you before, even I know we say these things sometimes about how, well, a football player might not want to move to a different country because they've got kids in the school or because their wife lives there and they like it and whatever, other reasons.
You're suggesting footballers live with their wives as well.
Live with their wives. But the point I'm making is that even though we say those things, they tend not to go into my mind until I see it happening in front of me. The first thing that, the reason like you asked me, Seb, why did I watch episode 2? Because the main thing that episode 1 left me with was that Paul Pogba has only left Manchester for 4 years since he was 16 years old, right? Obviously, he likes it. It's just not something that I think about because the discussion around him is, oh, he wants more money or he wants to feel better about himself. He wants, it's all very individualistic, self-centered. That's the discussion that happens around him. He's lived in Manchester since he was 16 years old. It's his home, right? He likes it there. His wife lives there. His children were born there. Like,
and presumably go to school there as well.
I think they're slightly too young to go to school. But yes, they would be doing. They have lives there, right?
Yeah.
And also these characters that are described in the press as sort of super villains from comic books. Mino Raiola is this terrible, terrible man whose only desire is to take away the happiness of children and football club executives. It seems like somebody who I'm sure has his faults, as we've all read about and discussed before, but at the very least has a genuine emotional relationship with Paul Pogba. There's a reason that all of his clients loved him in the way that they did, and I think it's just even though it's obviously a 2.1 out of 10 advert, it still does give you the opportunity to see the human being behind the brand. Again, we circle back to it being called Pogmentary. Human error there.
That's very stirring. I'm not going to go and watch it, but
no, you don't need to because I've told you everything. But I'll finish it though.
If you could just get the clips of those,
those
tendentious little movements towards one another that you've recognised that human quality of like togetherness that it's like sounds like a Werner Herzog production.
But this is why I believe in the death of the author there, John, because the people who've made this documentary, they haven't made what I've just described.
Not intended.
I made that.
Exactly.
When watching it, I'm the reason that what just came out of it. It's not to do with them. They've just put loads of stuff on a plate and expected everyone to gobble it all up. Not me. I've just gone for the peas, the delicious, nutritious peas. Anyway, that's the Pogumentary. But I'll be watching the rest of it.
Oh, that's good.
I think there's 4
Seeing as you're the only one who
episodes.
ever got anything out of it, or the right things out of it, it's probably good that you've watched the whole thing.
And I will watch more. I like him.
I like him too. I think he's a smart guy.
I like him. And I'm scared.
And he lives with his wife.
That's my realization from watching A Human Story. Man loves children. There we go. Anyway, that's the end now, I think. Unless we didn't get around to talking about Juanma Leo leaving. Maybe we'll do that another time. Premier League 2. I don't even know what that is, so maybe we'll talk about that another time there, Seb Stafford-Bloor. But Danke schön and Auf Wiedersehen.
Willkommen.
Bitte schön.
Yes. Anything you wanted to say to the listeners before you go?
No, not really. No.
No. Great. John Mackenzie, Jonathan Rossdog Mackenzie. Yeah?
Yes, my
Working
good friend
class
Joe.
Seb. Working class.
Joe with the glasses. Yeah. No,
Not Joe with glasses. That's...
Joe doesn't need glasses because he sees into the heart of humans. That's what we've learned today.
That is true. You just the little micro body language things, very small.
I would miss all of that for sure.
Well, that's what happens when you haven't got a real personality. John Mackenzie, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Producer Jamie, hoping for
Mr.
a better showing over the next week or so. I won't be calling him Mr. Jamie. Maybe I will now. That's quite funny, Mr. Jamie. Thank you. And thanks to whoever's editing the audio. Maybe it's Adonis. Maybe it's our good friend Adonis. We don't know. We just don't know at this point. But we will be back next week to discuss more. Lots of people asking me at the moment when Sensible Transfers is starting. It's starting soon. Pretty much throughout the month of July, Sensible Transfers will be there for people to enjoy.
2 weeks away. 2 weeks.
2 weeks away. We've had a lot of fun preparing for them this year. So we look forward to showing.
We've had some fun. Some.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a lot of preparation, so it's been some fun. I mean, it's just let's get the ratios right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fun is in the micro interactions between the humans that we made along the way. Find.
Made friends. Yeah.
That's the end now. See you later. Bye.